Namaste friends. Welcome to my third speech on the Indian Inca civilization and its relationship with the ancient Indian Vedic Hindu culture and civilization. I am extremely grateful to the Vivekananda Prabodhini and the Vivekananda Kendra Kanyakumari for giving me this opportunity to share my experience with the Aztecs of Mexico, the Mayas of Guatemala and its adjacent countries, and the Inca culture of Peru. When I visited Peru for a conference at the Universidad Mayor de San Marcos, I found no traces of the ancient Inca culture. The population is totally converted to Christianity. Of the Aztecs and the Mayas and the Incas, the Inca nation and its people are the victims of Spanish imperialism. They have forgotten almost everything about their past and show a quiet acceptance of their fate. So, when you visit Peru, you see only the poverty and feel a sense of loss. All the past glory is gone. What remains is the archaeological ruins protected by the UNESCO. Some available concrete archaeological evidences has revealed that the first settlement in the Cusco Valley actually date to 4500 BCE. The Inca civilization stretched from the Andes of Venezuela southward down the Andes to northern Argentina and Chile. Less than a century prior to the arrival of the Spanish conquistadores, the Incas, already established in Peru, had united most of the different cultures into one single state. Now, about the Inca Empire. The Inca Empire was 3,000 miles long and several hundred miles wide, stretching from southern Colombia to central Chile, from the Pacific Ocean to the Amazon. The empire comprised of modern Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, half of Chile, and northwestern Argentina, a land of desert in the west, to the endless rainforest in the east. Notable features of the Inca Empire included its monumental architecture, especially stonework, extensive road network reaching all corners of the empire, finely woven textiles, use of knotted strings, quipus, for record keeping and communication, agricultural innovations, and so on. The capital of the Inca Empire was Cusco, a Quechua word for navel. It was believed that through Cusco, heaven nourished the earth. The Inca Empire was centered in what is now Peru from 1438 to 1533 and represented the height of the Inca civilization. The Inca state was known as the Kingdom of Cusco before 1438. The last Sapa Inca, that is the emperor of the Inca Empire, was captured and killed on the orders of the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro, making the beginning of Spanish rule. After Pizarro murdered the Inca king Atahualpa in 1533, the Spaniards were inflamed by power and greed. They used Manco Inca Yupanqui as their puppet, through whom they impressed upon the Inca people that they were sent by God to help the natives. Later, even Manco Inca Yupanqui was put in prison. The Spaniards raped his women in front of him and even urinated on his face. With typical Indian stoicism, the Inca kept his composure. Manco Yupanqui questioned, "Is this what Viracocha commands? Has he asked that you take by force everyone's property, and why? Such is not the customs amongst us." When he had had enough, Manco Inca Yupanqui called his lords and generals and gave the following speech, and I quote, "My brothers and sons, I have called you together here over the past few days so that you may see the new kind of people that have brought themselves to our country, and which are these bearded ones in this city. Because they told me they are Viracocha's men and appear to be so in this new dress, I commanded you to serve and obey them as you would serve my own person, thinking that they were the people sent from afar by Viracocha, which is to say by God. But it is clear to me that everything has turned out the very reverse of what I had expected, because these people have given me plenty of demonstration since entering my country that they are the children not of Viracocha but of the devil. This is the sad story of how and what the Incans suffered, the same as the story of the Aztecs and the Mayas. And the story continues even today. Spanish rule ended or transformed many elements of the Indian civilizations, notably influencing language, religion, and overall the Inca Empire. Forced religious conversions, massacres, murders, epidemics, all evils fell on the Incas. Today, most of the people are Christians, worshipping Christian gods, celebrating Christian festivals, and singing Spanish prayers. Prior to this total metamorphosis, the Inca people were a decent community, ruled by pious gods, fearing kings, following rules of life taught to them by their ancient religion. Their religion, their way of life was broadly similar to that of the life of the Vedic Indian people and their culture. Now, let us have a look at the ancient pre-Columbian Inca kingdom and the society of those times, and in what way they are similar to that of the Hindus. Incan societies, deities. Like the Hindus, the Inca people were polytheists and idolaters. Viracocha was one of the most important deities in the Inca pantheon. He is seen as the creator of all things and intimately associated with the sea. According to legend, in the beginning, the creator god Viracocha came out of the Pacific Ocean, and when he arrived at Lake Titicaca, he created the sun. Viracocha created the universe, sun, moon, and stars, time by commanding the sun to move over the sky. Thus, he was the one who began the Inca civilization. Viracocha was worshipped as god of the sun and of the storm. As shown in the picture, Viracocha was represented as wearing the sun for a crown, with thunderbolts in his hand and tears descending from his eyes as rain. We can easily call him with the name Vishnu, the preserver. His Aztec counterpart is Tezcatlipoca. Inti was the sun god. Inca believed he was the son of Viracocha. As in the ancient Hindu tradition, the Sapa Inca too was believed to be the direct descendant of Inti, or the sun. Inca legend says Inti taught Manco, Capac, and Mama Oclo the art of civilization, and then he sent them to earth so that they can bring civilization to earth. So this was the primal couple. The Inca were sun worshippers. The sun Inti was the god of architecture, as shown in the picture. Inti was represented as a golden disc with rays and a human face in the center. This is how the Hindus too show the sun god. Now, Pachamama is a goddess revered by the indigenous people of the Andes. She is also known as the Earth Mother. In Inca mythology, Pachamama is a fertility goddess who presides over planting and harvesting, embodies the mountains, and causes earthquakes. She is also an ever-present and independent deity. Pachamama is the mother of Inti, the sun god, and Mama Killa, the moon goddess. Today, Pachamama remains benevolent, giving, and a local name for Mother Nature. Thus, many in South America believe that problems arise when people take too much from Mother Nature. Goddess Pachamama and Mama Cocha rule over the functions dealing with agriculture and fishing. Mama Kocha was also the ultimate source of all water, including rivers, the earth, and the sea. There are thus the chief god Viracocha representing creation, the sun god Inti who nourishes the mother earth, represented by Pachamama, a concept of life provided by the Hindus. Religious ceremonies and festivals. Now, about the religious ceremonies. Like the Hindus, Inca religious ceremonies followed the Inca calendar. The seasons of the year were very important to the Inca because they lived off the land. Their calendar was divided into 12 lunar months, named for important agriculture and religious events. Since the season in the south of the equator are reversed, the January of the Inca calendar was the equivalent of June on North America. The calendar year began with December, which is like May in the north. This explains the month difference and the difference in seasons in India and the Inca calendar. Little is known about the Inca intellectual life because they kept their records by quipu, a medium that invaders never mustered the courage to learn because it is very complicated. Now, what are quipus? Incas stored all their knowledge and records in quipus. Quipus are strings tied in long fringes, making elaborate use of knotting, color, and position. The system may seem laborious to us, but it was the creation of a society that produced the world's finest weaving and set great store by the practical and metaphorical properties of the thread. Interestingly, Latvia, a Baltic nation, also has this system. They stored and presented the Vedic knowledge orally and in records and songs called the dainas, which are similar to the quipus. They have that practice of tying knots to threads and color combination and the number of threads, etc. They have their own script with the dainas. These dainas are songs with knots. For example, a very ancient folk song is like this. Who is Laima? She is writer with knots. She is writer with stitches. She is making knots and stitches all time doing this and cannot finish. So this means that she is Laima. Laima is Lakshmi. She is the writer with knots. She writes with stitches and she makes knots and stitches, and all the time she is doing this and she cannot finish. That means she is the mother of the universe and she is creating the universe, and the process of creation still goes on, it doesn't finish. Unfortunately, the quipus were meticulous records. Keepers were destroyed by Pizarro and his men. With the quipus went all the vital information on the glorious Inca Empire. Now we can only mourn the loss. From the picture we can see that like the Hindu festivals, the Inca festivals too were very colorful. Now about the Inca social system. The Incas also had almost similar social system with that of the ancient Indians. For example, training boys. Boys of all class had an initiation ceremony at about the age of 14. The ceremony for boys was a collective one. In the village, a ceremony was held once a year. The mothers of the boys to be initiated wore breechcloths for them. At the initiation ceremony, each boy received a man's name, put on the breechcloth, and joined the men of the village at the simple feast. Boys of 13 were tested for IQ test. Then those who passed were taken to school. Graduates of this school became noblemen. These persons served as civil services members. At 7 or 8, children were expected to help their parents. At 13, a boy began to work with his father. At 14, he was taxed as an adult. The boy learned all the skills they needed for life as adults. Now, this is just like the Chaturvarna Vyavastha and the traditional handing over of knowledge and skills of the working class. Now, about the women. The girls' ceremonies were individual. Women were very important in Inca family. They took care of the children and also of household jobs. Inca mother loved their child. She took care of the baby for the moment it was born. The baby was placed on a cradle board only when it was 4 years of old. Now, growing up, when a girl reached maturity, there was a ceremony to introduce her into womanhood. During the ceremony, the girl remained shut up in her home. She fasted for 3 days. First 2 days she ate nothing, and on third day she could chew some kernels of corn. On the fourth day her mother bathed her, and then she put on a new dress. A feast was held for her. She waited on the relatives in the feast, and her most important uncle gave her a permanent name. Friends, we don't have much information on the social life of either women or those people because they were forced to change their way of life, and the whatever way of life they were living for centuries were made to appear useless and also devilish. So, growing in the Inca society was almost similar to that of the ancient Indians. The life of women was also similar. Segregation of menstruating women was found among the Aztecs and the Mayas and the Incas. They were all having all these traditions. Now, about the families of Inca. Inca society was formed on the basis of Ailu. Like the Hindu Gotra, in an Ailu, all the people belonged to a common ancestor. In an Ailu, all members lived together. They had combined land and they cultivated together. Their ancestors' body was kept in the place, and they all descendants, prayed for him. On any big occasion, they get together and worship their common ancestor. Even at present days, Ailu is a very important family and social unit. Now, let us consider some research in this field. Dr. V. Ganapati Sthapati has described his exciting trek of discovery, which began 11,000 feet high in central Peru at the famed Incan site of Machu Picchu, which remained hidden until 1911. The on-site inspection by Dr. Sapati was to determine if the Incan and Mayan structures did allow a modular plan and reflect the Vastu Purusha Mandala. Spanish rule ended or transformed many elements of the Indian civilizations, notably influencing religion and the Inca Empire. I had an opportunity to visit Peru only recently for delivering a speech at the conference I mentioned earlier. This conference was organized by the Universidad Mayor de San Marcos and Digambar Jain Mahasabha Cultural Heritage Protection Center, India. As the pictures reveal, and I am producing some pictures for you, as the pictures reveal, we visited the ancient cultural sites which show the ruins of the Inca civilization. UNESCO has preserved those sites in and around Lima, as well as those in Cusco, the second and original capital of Peru. The following pictures taken at the archaeological site Vichava show me and Professor Hector Maldonado Felix of Lima, Peru. He worked in the same university. Lima is a modern westernized city with hardly anything to show the glorious culture the country once had inherited from their ancestors. With the quipus destroyed, there are hardly any records. Sadly, there is little awareness of the past or even interest in reviving it. So they have become totally passive. Now, about Cusco. Lima is the capital of Peru and Cusco is the second capital. Cusco, a city in the Peruvian Andes, was once capital of the Inca Empire and is now known for its archaeological remains and Spanish colonial structure. Plaza de Armas is the central square in the old city with arcades, carved wooden balconies, and Incan wall ruins. The Baroque Santo Domingo convent was built on top of the Incan temple of the sun and has archaeological remains of Inca stonework. Formerly the capital of the extensive Inca Empire, Cusco retains much of its highly crafted early stone architecture, which is typically preserved in the foundation and lower stories of Spanish colonial structures. Cusco was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1983. Situated in the Peruvian Andes, Cusco developed under the Inca ruler Pachacutec into a complex urban center with distinct religious and administrative functions. Most of the Inca people are still living in towns of San Sebastian and San Jeronimo, Cusco, Peru. At present, they are probably the most homogeneous group of Inca lineage. As in all Native American countries, Christianity is the dominant religion. Quechua is spoken by the elderly people. Otherwise, Spanish is the language of communication. Acculturation of Peru and other parts of the ancient Inca Empire is complete. Genetic studies are going on in Peruvian universities. Only DNA analysis can prove the origin of the Incan people, and we can get authentic information regarding the origin. Friends, recent research is showing that the Mahabharata period is 7,000 years old and that of Ramayana 14,000 and that of the Vedic period 21,000 years old. Much water has flown in the Ganges since Vedic period. Civilizations grew, developed and got destroyed. Call it the cycle of nature or the Kala Chakra. What is at the top is bound to come down. What is created is going to be destroyed one day. What remains is the broken evidence also to be destroyed by the ravages of time. We have seen how advanced these glorious Aztecs, Maya, Inca cultures were once upon a time, most prominent and were at the peak of their achievements and glory. So was the glory of the Hindu nation and its riqueza, that is, wealth. Fortunately, we have been able to survive in our own indigenous culture and have been successful in retaining a major part of our ancient knowledge. Our libraries are full even today. Our temples are intact. Hence, today, in spite of the passages of many centuries and the external aggressions on our motherland, we are at least in a position to provide enough internal evidence today to help prove the ancient Indian roots and links of these ancient civilizations of America. Latest research under the leadership of Dr. Vasanta Shinde has given DNA evidence to prove that the Aryans did not come from outside India and that they were the indigenous people of India, thus blowing the theory that the Aryans were the invaders. Let us hope that in future similar scientific evidence will be available to prove the ancient Indian roots of the Native American cultures beyond doubt. Thank you very much.